Hey guys, it's Courtney. Today I'm going to be using the new Castle Scene Builder die set as well as the Magical Sentiment stamp set, both by Trinity Stamps. This is part of their new release. I'm starting off by taking my dies and running this through my die cutting machine a few different times with some black cardstock. We're going to end up making 3 different cards here, all with Distress Oxide ink black backgrounds. For my first card, we're going to be using Carved Pumpkin, Abandoned Coral, Picked Raspberry, and Wilted Violet. And here I'm just laying out my little hills so that I know where my ink blending needs to begin. And I'll start off with the Carved Pumpkin towards the bottom part of the panel and then work my way up with the Abandoned Coral, Picked Raspberry, then the Wilted Violet on the top. Now the first time you go over this, it's going to look pretty messy. You want to just keep going until all of your colors blend. Typically, once I reach the top of my card panel, I'll work my way back down, grabbing each of my ink blending tools. Sometimes I'm re-inking them. Sometimes I'm just using the leftover ink that's on there. If I don't necessarily want to add more color, I just want my colors to blend. Once I was happy with the blending, I am going to be adding stars or snow to each one of these panels in 3 different ways. So for this one, I'm going to be using some shimmer spray, and there is a ton of different brands out there for the shimmer spray, and any of them will work fine. You just want to make sure that you shake it up really well because most of that shimmer or the glitter, whatever's in there, kind of settles to the bottom. I'll just use the nozzle to splatter some of that onto my card panel. I'll dab that up with a paper towel after I let that sit there for about 10 or 15 seconds, and then I'll put this panel aside to dry. For my next panel, I'm going to be doing pretty much the same thing as far as the ink blending goes. I'm going to be using Tumbled Glass, Stormy Sky, Faded Jeans, and Black Soot. Again, starting with my lightest color here down towards the bottom of the card panel for the Tumbled Glass, then the Stormy Sky, then the Faded Jeans, and then the Black Soot right on the top. Now these 3 blues blend very well together, so I didn't really have to go back and forth too many times. The Black Soot, I had to kind of work at it a little bit, but once I had that blended, then the blues were pretty easy to blend from there. But basically doing the same thing, again, sometimes re-inking my ink blending tool, other times just going in with the ink that I had left on it. Now for the stars or the snow on this particular panel, I'm going to be using some Perfect Pearls, and you can use any color of the Perfect Pearls here. I know they have metallics, they have gold and silver. I'm going to be just using the regular Perfect Pearls. It's Perfect Pearl. Just going to put a little bit onto an acrylic block with a few drops of water, mix that together and splatter that on with my paintbrush. Again, letting this sit for about 10 or 15 seconds and then dabbing that up with my paper towel, and I'll leave this one aside to dry. For my third and final panel, I'm going to be using Wild Honey, Carved Pumpkin, Candied Apple, and Wilted Violet. And again, doing the same thing as I've done for the other 2 panels, starting with the Wild Honey, then the Carved Pumpkin, then the Candied Apple, and the Wilted Violet. This one ended up not looking so much like a night scene, but more like a rainbow. But once I had everything put together, it looked fine. For the stars or the snow, for this one, I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I'm going to take some inexpensive acrylic white paint, and you can get this at any craft store. You can even get it at Walmart or Target. And I'm going to squirt a little bit of this onto an acrylic block, and I'm going to add a little bit of that Perfect Pearls just to add a little shimmer to it. And again, just putting a couple of drops of water, mixing that together and splattering this onto my card panel. I did not dab this up with a paper towel. I just let this dry as is. This will give you a little bit of texture once that paint dries. Once all of my panels were complete and dry, we're going to go ahead and put together our little scenes here with our die cut pieces. And I'm only going to show you one here. I pretty much did the same thing for each and every one of them, just changed up the placement a little bit. I'll start by adding my hills, and I'm going to adhere my larger hill first with my Tombow Mono multi-glue, and then I'll adhere my smaller hill on top of that also with that same glue. I'm not really too concerned if some of this is hanging over my card panel, either on the top or the sides. I'm going to go ahead and trim this down. Some of the paper that I used was just bigger than an A2 size card, but it's easier to trim down. For my little building here, this is actually a castle, but we're obviously not using it as one. I'm going to cut little strips of some scrap yellow cardstock and just adhere that to the back of my little building there with my Tombow Mono multi-glue. This is not necessary. I just wanted to make it look as if the windows on the building are lit. Otherwise, you would just see your ink blended background in the background, or through the windows rather, and that's fine too. Once I had that done, I took little itty bitty tiny pieces of Scotch foam tape and adhered my little building there on top of my hill. Then there are some trees in this die set, and I adhered some of those flat, kind of tucking the tree trunk behind my little hills there. And I also added some of the stars that are also part of the die set into the background. And like I said, I did all of the same thing for all three of my panels, just kind of mixing up the placement for the buildings and the trees. And for the sentiments, we're going to be using the Magical Sentiment stamp set. For my first two panels where we used the shimmer spray and the perfect pearls, I'm going to adhere or stamp my sentiments flat onto the card panel, and I'm going to be using VersaFine Onyx Black ink. For this magical word, this is actually two separate stamps, so you can either use magic or magical. I'm going to start by stamping my magic, and then I'll add my AL, and then stamp flat the have a and Christmas underneath my magical. For the third panel, I wasn't able to stamp directly on this because of the acrylic paint that we use. It kind of adds a little bit of texture, and you won't necessarily get good results if you stamp directly on it. So I'm going to take two of the stamps from the sentiment stamp set, line those up onto my grid mat there. I usually stamp off on a scrap piece of paper just to make sure my placement is correct. I'll treat a piece of black cardstock with my anti-static tool, stamp this with Versamark ink, and white heat emboss this. I cut this down into a pretty thin strip, pop this up with some Scotch foam tape, and added that to the same area as I added the other sentiments. Last, I added a little bit of shimmer to the inside of the windows of my little building there, and adhered all of these to A2 size card bases. And those are the cards for today, guys. Thank you guys so much for stopping by, and have a great day. Bye.